So today we're going to be describing Objective 3 in the Fort Hays State University's Educating Exceptional Students class, which basically is describing the social, cognitive, intellectual, and academic characteristics associated with different types of exceptionalities. And I think the first thing that I need to do is explain what an exceptionality is. For this course, I feel like we can describe it as a disability of some kind, any kind that you can think of, versus the other definition of exceptionality, which is gifted. So for the purpose of this course, we're going to do disabilities. And I think exceptionalities is such a broad term and idea that we're going to kind of explain it in a broad term and idea versus looking at specific exceptionalities, because we could do that for a long period of time. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the big idea. An idea is a concept that deals, or it's a law really, that explains that students with disabilities are entitled equal opportunity to learn. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is a law that makes public education free and appropriate. That's the most important word there, is appropriate education to children with disabilities throughout the U.S. So there are 13 qualifying disabilities that protect students. So if you have one of these 13 disabilities, you would qualify for special services. And even if you had more than one, there's an exceptionality in there for that also. And let's look at those. So the 13 exceptionalities or disabilities is we're going to look at are specific learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, auditory processing disorders. The second one is other health impairments. That's defined, it's an umbrella definition that covers things that limit children's strength, energy, alertness, which would be like ADHD. You have your autism spectrum disorders, your emotional disturbance, like depression and anxiety, the speech or language impairments, visual impairments, deafness, hearing impairments. Number 9 is deaf and blindness. 10 is orthopedic impairments, so things like cerebral palsy. Number 11 is intellectual disability. The biggest kind of example of that is Down syndrome. And then you have 12, which is a traumatic brain injury, which would be result of a car crash or concussions or things like that. And then 13 is any one of those disabilities combined with another. So you can have multiple and still be protected under IDEA. The biggest thing when looking at disabilities and the characteristics of them is looking at the numbers. It's really important to understand that about 6.7 million children are affected by a disability and require additional services in public education. And right now, currently, that's about 13% of the total school, public school enrollment environment. And you can kind of see my numbers there and how they've increased over time. So to kind of get an idea of that, we're going to look, you can see that the different percentages that make up that 6.7 million number, which is broken down into the specific learning disabilities. So you have 34% of those students, 20% of students qualify under IDEA with speech or language impairments, 14 with other health impairments, 9% makes up the autism area, developmental delay, and intellectual disability, each make up 16% of their own of that number, and then you can see the breakdown further. So if you're wanting to look more at the numbers that I found or more of the information that I found throughout this presentation, you can go to this source. This is where I've gotten all of my information for this project at the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. So there's a lot of really great resources there too. You can just follow that link there. So now that we kind of know what the different disabilities are, we're going to go and look at the characteristics associated with each of these types of exceptionalities. So the social characteristics of anyone, really anyone who has a disability, be that those individuals are less observant in their social environments and they may misinterpret social cues and things of that nature, so they don't behave socially normal. They also may not learn as easily or learn from their experiences like their peers may, so their social cues may be off. And some children, you see a lot of immaturity. You think, oh, this child should act a certain way, but because of their learning disability or their disability, their social skills are a lot lower than you would think of like normal social skills. And then this is kind of a bad thing too, because while students are trying to become socially accepted in their peer groups, they may try too hard and may experience inappropriate kind of social interactions. So that's something to be aware of when working with students who have any kind of learning disability. Cognition, the characteristics of cognition with students with disability is pretty easy. It's just the thought process a student has, or any individual has. So somebody with a learning disability or physical disability may have trouble understanding material and not maybe be able to follow the thought process that you may think would be an appropriate or normal thought process, and they may be delayed in the amount of information that they can produce when compared to their peers. So when comparing peer to peer, you may see that informational delay with students who have learning disabilities or physical disabilities that limit their learning. Intellectually, this is kind of interesting because this information and all these characteristics can really be adapted and looked at from a gifted standpoint versus a delayed or a disabled person, or someone who has a learning disability who needs the extra help. They may or may not have the ability to learn information quickly in certain areas. Some people are a little bit slower in other areas in general, and then you add in a learning disability, and then that just kind of adds to that. On the gifted end, you have a need for constant mental stimulation. Somebody who has autism may be needed to constantly have some sort of stimulation so they can, just sit still or just focus on one task at a time. On the gifted end, you have students who have the ability to take broad ranges of information and pull them together. In a disabled learner or somebody who has a learning disability, they may not be able to do that. So you kind of have both sides of a coin there. And then a lot of students, and I think this is just a young age kind of characteristic, is that they're curious. They're constantly wanting to know things and have questions, and are probably bothering a lot of teachers because they're constantly asking questions. And I feel like students with ADHD or who are extremely gifted just want to know. They need that information to continue to process what they are going through or what they're experiencing. So intellectually, this characteristic can be seen for either those who have a disability or who are gifted. So intellectuality is an interesting characteristic to kind of look at, and there's a lot of information on that also on the website I provided. Academics, for those who have disabilities, just really comes down to differentiation of instruction. You have to meet students where they're at and where you think they kind of need to go, and then fill in the gaps with information accordingly. So So the characteristics are super broad and can really be related to each exceptionality. And academics is the most basic characteristic you can take, because it really does just boil down to differentiating that instruction so that student can learn. You want them to learn any kind of material that you can think of. You're reading, you're writing. They all want to know these things and they all want to do these things. So in order for them to do that and be successful at that, you just have to differentiate their instruction, which I think is such an important and creative way to get to be involved with your students and to create great learning experiences for them. So this characteristic is very straightforward. Differentiate the instruction for those who need it. So this is my description of the social, cognitive, intellectual, and academic characteristics associated with different exceptionalities. I didn't choose just one or two exceptionalities to focus on because I feel like when you're looking at characteristics of the exceptionalities in these four areas, they're really interchangeable. They can be for any disability or exceptionality, whether you're looking at it from the gifted end or the disabled end, however you wanna think about it. But I wanted to do a broad presentation of that information because I do feel like each characteristic is interchangeable with any disorder or exceptionality a student may have, whether it be autism, ADHD, a hearing impairment, or anything like that. Just because it's such a big idea and big thought. So, hope you enjoyed.